In 399 BC, the greatest philosopher who ever lived lifted a cup of poison to his lips. His students wept. His friends begged him to escape. The prison door was open, he could have walked away. But Socrates drank the hemlock willingly, with a smile on his face. His final words would haunt humanity for 2,000 years. What did he know that made death preferable to silence? What truth was worth more than his own life? Death before dishonor. Today, we descend into the final hours of philosophy's first martyr, and discover why his last words still echo through the ages. The trial. Athens was terrified of Socrates, not because he was violent, not because he commanded armies, but because he asked questions that made powerful men look like fools. I know that I know nothing. This wasn't humility, it was a weapon. For decades, Socrates had wandered the streets of Athens, engaging politicians, poets, and craftsmen in dialogue. He'd exposed their ignorance with surgical precision. The oracle at Delphi had proclaimed him the wisest man alive, and he spent his life proving that wisdom meant recognizing your own ignorance. But powerful men don't like being humiliated. The charges were absurd, corrupting the youth, impiety against the gods. Everyone knew the real crime was making Athens think. At 70 years old, Socrates stood before 500 jurors. He could have begged for mercy. He could have gone into exile. Instead, he did something that sealed his fate. He told them the truth. But the trial wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of his greatest lesson. The verdict. When Socrates addressed the jury, he didn't apologize. He didn't plead. He compared himself to a gadfly, a pest that stings a lazy horse to keep it moving. Gadfly of Athens. Athens was that horse, and Socrates was the sting it needed but didn't want. The jury voted guilty by a narrow margin. Just 30 votes made the difference. Then came the sentencing. In Athenian law, both sides proposed a punishment. The prosecution demanded death. Socrates was expected to propose exile, a sentence everyone would accept. Instead, he proposed a reward for his services to the city. He suggested free meals at the public hall, the honor given to Olympic champions. The jury was enraged. The final vote for death wasn't even close. But here's what most people miss. Socrates chose this outcome. He knew exactly what he was doing. As the philosopher Plato wrote, the unexamined life is not worth living. And Socrates was about to prove he meant every word. What happened next would transform his death into an immortal lesson. The prison. For 30 days, Socrates waited in prison. Not because Athens was cruel, but because a sacred ship had sailed to Delos, and no executions could happen until it returned. His wealthy friend Crito came with a plan. The guards had been bribed. A ship was waiting. Socrates could escape to Thessaly and live out his days in comfort. Escape, any reasonable man would have accepted. But Socrates wasn't reasonable, he was philosophical. He asked Crito a simple question. Would it be just to escape? The laws of Athens had given him life, education, and 70 years of freedom to philosophize. Do you imagine that a city can continue to exist if its legal judgments are powerless? To flee would be to betray everything he taught. He had spent his life arguing that virtue matters more than survival, that the soul matters more than the body. Virtue over survival. Now was the test. Crito left that prison in tears, understanding that his friend had already made his choice, and that choice would echo through millennia. But why was Socrates so calm about facing death? Death's gift. On his final day, Socrates made an astonishing argument. Death might be the greatest gift. Think about it. Either death is like a dreamless sleep, complete non-existence, or it's a transition to another place where all the dead have gone. If death is dreamless sleep, then it is a wonderful game. What night of sleep is so peaceful you don't even dream? Such rest, Socrates argued, would be pure blessing. But if death is a journey to another realm, then he would finally meet Homer, Hesiod, and all the great thinkers who came before. He could continue his questioning there, examining heroes and kings to see if they were truly wise. Either way, death held no terror. No evil can happen to a good man. either in life or after death. This wasn't denial. This wasn't bravado. Socrates had genuinely reasoned his way to peace with mortality. His students, however, were not so composed. As the sun began to set, the moment they dreaded finally arrived. The hemlock. The jailer entered with tears streaming down his face. In his hands, he carried a cup containing crushed hemlock, the standard Athenian method of execution. Poison cup of truth. The jailer apologized. He said Socrates was the noblest and gentlest prisoner he'd ever known. Socrates smiled and thanked him for his kindness. Then he asked a simple question: "How should I drink this?" "Walk around until your legs grow heavy," the jailer explained. "Then lie down. The poison will do its work." Socrates took the cup without trembling. His students broke down. Apollodorus began sobbing loudly. Socrates gently scolded them for their grief. He had sent the women away earlier precisely to avoid such scenes. "I have heard that one should die in silence. Be quiet and have patience." He lifted the cup to his lips and drank it down easily, cheerfully, as if it were wine at a symposium. His students watched in horrified awe as he walked around the room, waiting for the numbness to begin. What came next would become philosophy's most sacred moment, the final walk. Socrates walked around the cell as instructed, his students watching every step. When his legs began to feel heavy, he lay down on the cot. The jailer pressed his foot, no sensation. Then his legs, nothing. The coldness was climbing toward his heart. The hemlock worked by paralyzing the body from the extremities inward. Socrates remained conscious as death crept through him. He covered his face with a cloth, but then suddenly uncovered it. His students leaned in, desperate for any final wisdom. What would the greatest philosopher say with his last breath? Would he reveal some ultimate truth? Would he curse Athens for its injustice? Final words approaching. Plato, who would later immortalize this scene in his dialogue Phaedo, watched with tear-streaked face. Xenophon, another student, wasn't present but would write his own account. The room held its breath. To fear death is to think ourselves wise when we are not. And then Socrates spoke his final words, words that have puzzled philosophers for over 2,000 years. The last words. Socrates turned to his closest friend Crito and said, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Make this offering to him and do not forget." Then he was gone. A rooster to Asclepius. What? These strange words have haunted scholars for millennia. Asclepius was the god of healing and medicine. Greeks offered roosters to him after recovering from illness. But Socrates was dying, not recovering. So what did he mean? Death as healing. The most profound interpretation is this: Socrates viewed death itself as the cure. Life, with all its bodily distractions and earthly concerns, was the illness. Death was the healing, the liberation of the soul from its prison of flesh. He thanked the god of healing for the cure of death. With his very last breath, Socrates transformed execution into enlightenment, punishment into freedom. Crito asked if there was anything else. Socrates made no answer. He had said everything that needed to be said. But his death was just the beginning of his immortality. The aftermath. Plato covered his face and wept. The other students were inconsolable. Crito closed Socrates' eyes and mouth. Such was the end of our friend, the best and wisest and most righteous man. But something extraordinary happened after that prison door closed. Athens immediately regretted what it had done. The accusers were shunned. Some were later executed themselves. Socrates had warned them, "You think you're silencing me, but you're actually creating martyrs. Killing truth-tellers only multiplies their message." Plato was so shattered by his teacher's death that he dedicated his entire life to preserving Socratic philosophy. He founded the Academy, the first university in Western history. Death created immortality. Aristotle studied there, then taught Alexander the Great. The chain of wisdom stretched from one dying philosopher in an Athenian prison to the conquest of the known world. If Socrates had escaped to Thessaly, he would have died forgotten. By accepting death, he became eternal, and his message still speaks to us today. The lesson. What does Socrates' death teach us? First, There are things worth more than survival. Your integrity is not for sale at any price. Socrates could have lived by compromising his principles. He chose death over dishonor. How many of us can say the same? Second, the examined life is the only life worth living. Socrates didn't just think about philosophy, he lived it, breathed it, died for it. Think Question Live. When was the last time you truly examined your beliefs? When did you last question why you believe what you believe? Third, death is not the enemy. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways, I to die and you to live. Which is better? Only the God knows. Socrates approached death with curiosity, not terror. He saw it as a transition, not an ending. In an age obsessed with extending life, Socrates reminds us that how we live matters more than how long. But there's one final truth his death reveals, the most important lesson of all. Eternal truth. 2,400 years have passed since Socrates drank that cup of poison. Empires have risen and fallen. Technologies have transformed humanity. Yet we still read his words. We still debate his ideas. We still ask the questions he asked. Why? Because Socrates discovered something fundamental about human existence. The pursuit of truth is what makes us fully human. To stop questioning is to stop living. Athens tried to silence one old man who asked uncomfortable questions. They failed completely. His death proved that truth cannot be executed. Ideas cannot be imprisoned. Allegiance to truth is the highest form of loyalty. Truth never dies. The gadfly of Athens still stings us awake. Every time you question authority, every time you examine your own beliefs, every time you choose integrity over convenience, Socrates lives through you. His final words weren't about roosters or gods. They were about freedom, the freedom that comes from living and dying by your own examined truth. Socrates walked into that prison knowing he would never walk out, and he was at peace. Not because he didn't value life, but because he valued something more. Soul over body. He showed us that death has no power over those who live for truth. He demonstrated that a life of questioning is worth more than a lifetime of comfortable ignorance. Be of good cheer about death, and know this as a truth, that no evil can happen to a good man. 24 centuries later, his last words still echo. A rooster to Asclepius. A thank you for the cure. Death as healing, execution as liberation. The poison that was meant to silence him became the elixir of his immortality. What questions are you afraid to ask? What truths are you avoiding? The unexamined life is still not worth living. Socrates paid the ultimate price so we could think freely. Honor his sacrifice. Question everything, and never stop seeking the truth. If this unlocked something in you, subscribe for more. The wisdom of the ages awaits.